Russia is betting on artificial intelligence to change the way it fights on the battlefield. But according to Forbes, Moscow may be missing a critical detail in this high-tech gamble. The report says Russia is preparing to deploy an AI-driven system known as SWOT, designed to assist frontline commanders in making real-time tactical decisions. The platform is expected to fuse satellite imagery, aerial photos, intelligence reports, and open-source data into a single operational picture. Artificial intelligence then analyzes the flow of information, simulates battlefield scenarios, and suggests what it sees as the most effective course of action. Forbes notes that field testing was completed in December, and Russian forces are expected to begin operational use in April 2026, starting on the Pokrovsk axis with the plans to expand it across all branches of the military by the fall. But here's the catch. Analysts say AI decision support tools work best against rigid, predictable opponents. Ukraine's approach to the war is the opposite, built on constant adaptation, rapid tactical learning, and fast deployment of new technologies. That dynamic, Forbes argues, could limit how effective SWOT actually becomes, because algorithms struggle to model an opponent that keeps changing faster than the system can update its assumptions. Meanwhile, Western military assessments suggest that while Russian forces continue to push forward, the offensive around the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd area could slow by spring as units become increasingly worn down. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine's security guarantees from the United States are now 100% ready to be signed. Speaking at a joint press conference in Vilnius alongside the leaders of Lithuania and Poland, Zelensky said Kyiv is waiting for its partners to confirm the date and location for the signing. The agreement would need to be ratified by both the US Congress and Ukraine's parliament. Zelensky also outlined what he called the European pillar of Ukraine's security guarantees. He said it should include the results of what he described as a coalition of the willing, as well as a clear timeline for Ukraine's membership in the European Union. He stressed that Kyiv wants any future peace agreement to include a firm commitment to Ukraine's European path, so that all sides, including Russia, would be expected to respect those terms. Earlier this month, Zelensky said talks in Paris with the US officials had brought the security guarantees document close to final approval by President Donald Trump. The issue was also raised during his meeting with the US President in Davos. Meanwhile, political reports that Washington views its own security guarantees for Ukraine as more significant than European ones, even as the United States has ruled out sending its troops to the country. As negotiations continue, Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy system are leaving millions without heat in sub-zero temperatures. Ukrainian officials say Moscow is using winter pressure as leverage, aiming to weaken civilian resilience and force political concessions. In Kyiv, residents are reacting cautiously to the prospects for peace after 2 days of trilateral talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States in Abu Dhabi. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko says more than 1,500 apartment buildings remain without heating as temperature falls to -10 degrees Celsius, highlighting the humanitarian impact of attacks on critical infrastructure. Ukrainian president described the meeting in the United Arab Emirates as constructive, saying they explored possible parameters for ending the war. A US official confirmed negotiators are expected to return to Abu Dhabi for another round on February 1st, marking the first known instance for the Trump administration engaging directly with both sides. On the streets of Kyiv, reaction remained divided. Some see the talks as a necessary step toward ending nearly 4 years of a full-scale war. Others argue that military strength, not diplomacy, will shape the outcome.
I'll tell you, there's no point in hoping. We have to fight. With Western countries, with weapons. Because what? There'll be a ceasefire now. He'll build up his strength, Putin, and then say, "Take care, I'm going again." So we have to stand firm, get through the winter, and then things will go our way.
A Czech company working with the volunteers is supplying Ukraine with FPV drones built using technology from a captured Russian unmanned aircraft, according to the outlet IDNES. The drone is called Jan Žižka, named after a famous Czech military commander. It operates on a fiber optic cable, making it highly resistant to electronic jamming. It's also about 3 times cheaper than most comparable models. The system is being developed by the Czech company Spark. The project began after Ukrainian forces intercepted a Russian drone and passed it on to volunteers. Engineers dismantled the device and used it designed as a basis for their own model. Most of the components are made in Czech Republic, including a fiberglass frame, 3D printed parts, batteries, and fiber optic spools that can stretch up to 25 kilometers. Thanks to a public fundraising initiative called A Gift for Putin, volunteers have raised around 14 million Czech crowns to finance the production of 500 drones for Ukraine. Part of a potential peace plan with Russia could include Ukraine joining to the European Union as early as January 1st next year. These details were disclosed by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who says he's relying on a reliable source. According to him, fast-tracking Ukraine's EU membership could become a condition for halting the fighting. At the same time, the Serbian leader warned that such a move could face resistance within the European Union itself. He named Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary and Slovakia as countries that could oppose an accelerated process. So far, there has been no official information of this information from Kyiv, Brussels or Washington. Ukraine has held EU candidate status since 2022, and formal accession talks began in 2024. Typically, the process takes several years and requires unanimous approval from all 27 EU member states. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly stressed that joining the EU and NATO remains Ukraine's strategic goal, regardless of any negotiations or peace plans. Europe is being weakened by its inability to fully support Ukraine. That is the core argument of the Telegraph's columnist Samuel Ramani, who says Europe must do far more to recognize and invest in the innovations Ukraine is developing, even under constant Russian bombardment. According to Ramani, Ukrainians continue to show remarkable resilience and creativity, but their resources are not limitless, and Western support too often amounts to half measures rather than a strategic commitment. He points to several positive examples. Ukraine's partnership with the American tech company Palantir to equip interceptor drones with artificial intelligence, the United Kingdom's push to significantly scale up drone production, and Poland's decision to increase gas exports to Ukraine. But Ramani warns that political disputes and supply chain problems are still slowing real progress, especially when it comes to strengthening Ukraine's air defenses and attracting large-scale investment into its energy sector. The broader message, he argues, is that insufficient support for Ukraine is not just hurting Kyiv, it is undermining Europe itself. Investing in Ukraine's defense technologies could strengthen NATO's resilience against emerging threats, while backing Ukraine's renewable energy potential could help Europe reduce its long-term dependence on Russia's fossil fuels. Speaking earlier in Davos, President Zelensky delivered a blunt message to European leaders, urging them to move from what he called a coalition of the willing to a coalition of action, and to shake off what he described as a dangerous complacency in the face of Russian aggression. While Ukraine is learning how to stop missiles in the air, Europe is still learning how to see them before they even leave the ground. According to analysts at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the United States remains the only NATO country with a full space-based early warning system for ballistic missile launches. American satellites detect the heat signature of a rocket at the moment of a launch and pass the data to allies almost instantly. Europe, for now, still relies on Washington for the first critical warning. Ground-based radars operate across the continent, including in the United Kingdom, but Europe does not have its own eyes in orbit. Russia's war against Ukraine has pushed this weakness to the top of the European security agenda. France and Germany have launched a joint project called Jewel, designed to give Europe its own satellite-based missile warning capability. The idea is ambitious: deploy satellites in geostationary orbit, supported by a wider network in higher orbits, to detect launches, track missiles in flight, and feed real-time data directly to command centers across Europe. In the timeline holds, the system could become operational around 2030. Security experts say the war in Ukraine has changed how Europe thinks about early warning. It is about buying minutes, sometimes seconds, that can mean the difference between protection and disaster for millions of civilians. China and Belarus are playing a growing role in supporting Russia's war efforts against Ukraine, according to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service. Deputy head of the agency says China has become one of Moscow's key economic partners. Dozens of joint projects worth more than $100 billion now linked to the two countries, spanning natural resources, transport infrastructure, and the defense industry. Ukrainian intelligence says Beijing is helping Russia work around financial restrictions through alternative payment systems and digital transactions. China is also supplying electronic components and high-tech equipment used in the production of missiles, drones, and military aircraft. Minsk, according to the Ukrainian intelligence, remains Moscow's main ally on the Western Front. Belarusian factories are deeply involved in Russia's defense orders. Military equipment is repaired on Belarusian territory, while ammunition and drones continue to be supplied. Ukraine also points to Iran and North Korea as key suppliers of weapons, including missiles, drones, and ammunition. This network of international support is helping Moscow sustain its war efforts despite Western sanctions and pressure. Russia's Arctic has been plunged into darkness. The cities of Murmansk and Severomorsk have spent a fourth day dealing with unstable power after aging transmission lines collapsed in freezing temperatures, according to Bloomberg. 5 high-voltage towers fell near Murmansk, cutting electricity and knocking out heating and water supplies. The blackout also hit Severomorsk, home to Russia's main northern fleet base. Heating and water services were partially restored, but the power grid remains fragile. Severe weather is slowing repairs, and replacement towers are still being delivered to the region. Russia's investigative committee has opened a negligence case, saying the grid operator failed the properly maintained decades-old infrastructure, now buckling under extreme cold. The Murmansk region is a key industrial hub, home to major mining and fertilizer operations. Officials say those facilities have not yet been disrupted. Around 300,000 people live in the two cities. Emergency center in schools and sports facilities are providing hot meals, drinking water, and phone charging, while public transport has been made free until power is fully restored. The irony is hard to miss. Instead of investing in its own cities, in heat and light for its citizens, Russia continues to pour resources into war and to destruction of our neighboring country. Pope Leo XIV has called for an end to the war in Ukraine, saying continued Russian attacks are leaving civilians exposed to the cold of winter. Speaking after his weekly Angelus prayer at the Vatican, the pontiff said the prolonged fighting is saving increasingly serious consequences for ordinary people. He urged the international community to step up efforts to stop the war and protect civilians facing the humanitarian impact of ongoing hostilities.
Evil can only be overcome with good. Together with these young people, let us pray for peace in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in every region where, unfortunately, people are fighting for interests that are not those of the people. Peace is built on respect for people.
That's all for now. For more content, please subscribe.